Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Matt Jarbo. Welcome back to another episode of Podio Commentary. Today we're going to be diving into the 1974 classic. It's a classic, let's be fair. We can call it that now. The movie is 50 years old, 51 years old, crazy to think about. But Black Christmas 1974 is a Canadian slasher movie that was directed by Bob Clark. Now, Bob Clark is a name that you may not be familiar with, but you should be. This homie, not only did he direct Black Christmas, what is known as the first slasher movie, he also directed one of the funniest movies ever made, Porky's, and one of the best Christmas movies ever made, motherfucking A Christmas Story. Okay, so like as far as like in the annals of history, this dude definitely belongs up there. And what sucks though is he died just right after the release of the 2006 remake of the movie, of which he gave his blessing to, and I'm going to be talking about that, and it's a movie. But this movie, you know, for those of you who don't know, Podio Commentary is a show where I talk about the production history of a film, give my thoughts on it, and everything else in between. Movies are, you know, always a great pastime to kind of fall in with. And over the course of this month, I've been watching a lot of older horror films that I've never seen, and maybe some ones that I shouldn't have seen. You know, like the Sleepaway Camp films, Silent Night, Deadly Night. Now, you know, the Black Christmas movies. Some have varying quality over others, but still at the same time, I'm glad to have watched that. Well, I can't. Okay. So like some of those I'm glad to have watched. Other ones, they leave me questioning my life choices. But I don't want to knock movies. I will definitely complain, but I do it from a place of like, I wish it was better. You know, not that I wish ill will. And this movie isn't one of those films, even though I do find it to be kind of slow at times. I see what they were going for, what they were trying to do, and I understand it a lot more. So this is a story that was actually like inspired by the urban legend, The Babysitter and the Man Upstairs. And it is based loosely on the actual Westmount neighborhood murders of Montreal, Quebec, where the murders, which actually occurred 30 years prior in 1943, were perpetrated by a 14-year-old boy who bludgeoned several of his family members to death. I mean, not really the same thing as a psychopath inside of a sorority house single-handedly taking out women one by one, but okay. You know, they initially had called the movie Stop Me, which I think was an idea of trying to like, you know, get the characters to stop the killer. But in this case, they wanted to change it to a university setting. And Bob Clark actually felt that the original script was a bit too straightforward of a slasher film, and then made several alterations to the dialogue. It also incorporated some humorous elements, particularly like the drunkenness of Margot Kidder's Bob and the house mom, Mrs. Mack, who Bob Clark apparently based on his real life aunt. And that is something that's interesting, where like Margot Kidder is like toasted most of the movie. And then we cut back to a lot of scenes of where the house mom is like just finding bottles of booze she strategically hid everywhere and then doing shots of those. I mean, I get it. If you were, you know, a later, you know, in life house mom to a bunch of sorority women that are, you know, drinking and smoking and fornicating, right? You're going to probably want to drink a little bit too. But I think one of the key things about this movie is its focus on the idea of abortion, you know, because that is really, I think, at the root of everything else that's going on. You know, with trying to figure out who this killer is. It does kind of go back to abortion, albeit that isn't kind of like the thing at the end. It's weird how they set it up. It's weird how they knocked it down. And that might be why, you know, the movie itself received kind of like mixed reviews when it came out, because the ending it definitely, like, it leaves you scratching your head. It has something to say, but it definitely leaves you scratching your head. Now, the movie stars Olivia Hussey, who just 6 years prior, she had played Juliet in Romeo and Juliet. Also, she recently passed away. So rip to that, and this is so funny because she actually decided to sign on to doing Black Christmas because she had gone to a psychic and had asked the psychic, please tell me my future. Tell me what to do. Tell me what I need to do. And so the psychic, and maybe they were correct, the psychic says that she would make a film in Canada and that it would earn a great deal of money. That's what the psychic told her, right? Go to Canada, make a movie. You'll make a lot of money. To be fair, Canadian movies can do pretty well. Porky's was the highest grossing Canadian movie, directed by Bob Clark, by the way. I think until Good Cop, Bond Cop came out, right? Unless I'm totally getting that wrong. And if I am, please tell me. But the movie, what got me, though, is like, because I watched the 2006 Black Christmas first. And it got me that Andrea Martin was in the movie. And then when I started watching the original Black Christmas, I saw that Andrea Martin was also in the movie as Phyllis, which was just kind of caught me off guard. But really, like, the key people here are like, Olivia Hussey, Keir Dullea from 2001: A Space Odyssey, and the sequel that came out years after this one was made. And then, of course, John Saxon. He had been in a lot of stuff over like 60 years, usually playing like cops and detectives and stuff. He was really good. And this was actually a guy that they wanted to get in the movie first, right? But he was unable to do it. So the role of Lieutenant Fuller was originally given to Edmund O'Brien, but upon his arrival to set, the producers realized he would be unable to fulfill the duties because he had failing health that was, caused by Alzheimer's. And so John Saxton, who had read the script prior, was called by the producers, and then they offered him the role. And then he had basically 2 days to get to Toronto from New York City in order to start filming. And, definitely he brought a lot to that role. Like he was good. He was a good standard cop role, because he also was in Nightmare on Elm Street as the dad. You know what I mean? So it's like he's very much like in that mindset here. Like you can almost see him being like Nancy's dad, dealing with this before sort of thing. And maybe that's one of the reasons why he acted the way he acted in Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm obviously not connected. Just kind of riffing on this one a little bit. It's okay. So the movie, they shot it from March 25th to May 11th, 1974, at a cost of roughly about $686,000, which I never like to use the term adjusted for inflation, but adjusted for inflation, at least with 2023 economy, that would be about $4 million. Still $1 million cheaper than what they shot Black Christmas 2019 for. And a couple $100,000 of this came from the Canadian Film Development Corporation. And again, Canada, man, really supported its filmmakers until Uwe Boll. And that might be a story worth diving into. So as I said before, the original title of the movie was going to be Stop Me. Then they decided to change the name to Black Christmas. And Bob Clark had said that he really enjoyed the irony of a dark event occurring during a festive holiday. But then Warner Brothers decided when they were going to release the film domestically to change the title to Silent Night, Evil Night for the film's theatrical release. So then then of course you've got 10 years later, Silent Night, Deadly Night, which spawned a massive franchise. Well, I don't say massive franchise, but a franchise nonetheless. And it makes me wonder if they were really pulling from this particular change, right? They're like, Silent Night, Evil Night came out. What about Silent Night, Deadly Night? Ooh, people might think it's a sequel. And again, another little play on our titling system for these horror films. But then again, I think even that movie might have gone through name changes depending on the country it's in. But ultimately, Black Christmas was distributed in Canada by Ambassador Film Distributors and released in Toronto on October 11th, 1974. And it only grossed $143,000 from 9 theaters in its first 2 weeks. and 1.3 million during its theatrical run in Canada. Look, man, 143,000 from 9 theaters in Toronto in 2 weeks. That's actually not bad for 1974. Wes Anderson will put out a movie in a limited run, and you'll see these headlines now that are like, Wes Anderson's newest movie made like $200,000 at just like 2 theaters or something. So it's like people are going to see it. Apparently, I don't know, at a marked up cost or whatever, but I don't think in 1974, the 9 theaters in Canada were charging that much money. So that probably did pretty well. But then the movie came to the United States, and Warner Brothers believed that the movie would earn at least $7 million in the United States. It was released on December 20th, but it only grossed $284,345 due to the competition of The Godfather Part 2 and James Bond's The Man with the Golden Gun. I mean, if you're going to go see a movie that weekend, you're probably going to do either The Godfather Part 2, which is, you know, in many ways as seen as by many people as the best sequel ever made. I wouldn't know. I haven't seen any of the Godfathers. Yeah, I know. I look forward to your angry emails. But I have seen The Man with the Golden Gun. You know, and of course, Americans, for its American release, the film was retitled to Silent Night, Evil Night due to fears that the original title would mislead audiences into believing that it was a blaxploitation film. They retracted the title after its initial release, restoring it to Black Christmas for subsequent screenings, which is good. I can see why they would think that it would be something that would happen with a blaxploitation film. I get that. And yeah, I mean, obviously at that time, blaxploitation was pretty massive. So you definitely don't want to do that. The movie ultimately became the 3rd highest grossing Canadian film of all time in Canada, with a gross of $2 million, behind The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz and the French language Deux Femmes and Or in 1970. So that's a piece of information you now need to know and take with you. To commemorate the film's 50th anniversary release in 2024, they did re-release the movie from December 7th to December 22nd in select cinemas across the United States, and a restored 4K format for the first time in the camera negative. Now, I don't know if that's hit physical media yet. I wouldn't mind seeing this in 4K. I watched like a 1080p copy of it, and it was really good. So I can't complain about that. But either way, I mean, the movie was a success for its budget, for its time, and it's definitely lived on for half a century. So you got a bunch of girls in the sorority house, and they all start getting these obscene phone calls from a person who they dub as the moaner. This is not like this is the first time the guy's called in, right? By the time the movie starts, this homie has called in so many times. Like, they know him. They're like, oh, it's the moaner calling again. You know, and he's saying a lot of stuff. He's saying a lot of real, like, nasty stuff, you know. And they're like, okay, just get off, do your thing, and be done. But then the person on the phone starts referencing to someone named Billy before then threatening to start killing them. All right. And so then you have a young student named Claire who gets kind of upset, and she goes upstairs to her bedroom to pack her suitcase. And then, unknown to anyone else in the thing, because keep in mind, like, they're all going home for Christmas, or they're all getting ready to go home for Christmas. So they're not in any way like, you know, they're just kind of like, I think of it like the opening of Home Alone, right? Where like they're all getting ready to go on a trip, and everyone is kind of doing their own thing. And so they don't notice that they leave Kevin. Well, in this case, they don't notice that Claire is attacked and murdered because she's asphyxiated by the person who climbed into the house. And then no one knows where she is. But then the next morning, well, then also no one cares because they think that she went upstairs to pack and that she's going to leave. So they think, okay, she's already fine. Well, then the next morning, her dad shows up saying that she failed to meet him at the train station. And this is when you've got like Mrs. McHenry. She offers to help him go look for Claire. And then, you know, we kind of get into the meat of the story where Jess, played by Olivia Hussey, tells her boyfriend Peter that she's pregnant, and she plans to basically get an abortion. Much to his, it says here in like the plot description, his disapproval. Yeah, I'm gonna say the disapproval part is maybe a little bit underplayed. This guy is a pianist, and he is at like a Catholic school, right? And so we know how the Catholics feel about abortion. And if I recall correctly, maybe my history on the subject is a little bit rusty, but like, wasn't the big call for anti-abortion in the Catholic Church something that happened in like the mid-60s? And if this movie is happening in the mid-70s, it seems kind of like that would be Like, 10 years down the road, you're going to play it up in a movie, have that conversation, you know? And so that's kind of the big conflict between Jess and Peter, is that like Peter gets really upset that she's, she wants to have an abortion, and he has trouble like really handling it. And that his escalation, is one of the things that you're kind of, it's like the MacGuffin. You're led to believe that this is the guy that is going to be the one killing everybody because he's so distraught over her wanting to kill his child, you know. But then, people are trying to still go, and like they're still trying to figure out what's going on with Claire. So everyone heads over. Barb and Phyllis head over to the police station and talk to this guy, Sergeant Nash. And like nothing, he doesn't care. It's the whole it's the trope of like the cop that doesn't give a shit. And I find that to be kind of fascinating with this particular movie, because you've got the desk clerk, and the same thing kind of goes with like even the 2019 remake, is like the cops just like don't necessarily care. But they don't care until a man comes in, right? Because in this particular case, Claire's boyfriend barges in and like demands that something be done about it. And then it's like, okay, let's go and do a search party. So it's only when like the dude shows up, this happens. But while they're doing this search for Claire, they end up discovering there's like another subplot that's going on where you've got a little girl that's gone missing. And, Claire's dad and I think Phyllis and a few others, they go to kind of help search for this little girl. Also, I think trying to see if anything comes up for Claire, and I thought that was a really interesting scene, because it's like they're upset, but they're also like, okay, well, let's try to help out here because maybe this might kind of like alleviate us of the stress in the moment, And then while this is happening, they find the body of a little girl who went missing, a little 13-year-old girl who went missing and was killed. And they don't ever give you any information about like who killed her. But I believe it's meant to heavily speculate, that Billy is the one that killed her while he was on his way to the house. Albeit it's something that is like, it's left up to your interpretation, which is, if you watch the 2019 remake, nothing there is left up to your interpretation. It is all very much laid out for you. But it's at this point that Mrs. McHenry decides to go into the attic. And here's where she discovers Claire's body. And this is where the killer then gets her, And it's kind of like, again, it's kind of isolating and pulling everyone away the best that they can. And then after that, the police are like, okay, we need to try to figure out who this moaner is. So they decide to put a tap on the phone. But they need Jess to be on the phone long enough with the moaner in order to trace the call. And the first couple times, like they're not able to get the long enough trace. And so it's at this point that they're obviously frustrated, but they have to just wait. And there is a group of Christmas carolers that come into the house, or they come outside of the house. And while they're doing that, the killer sneaks upstairs while Barb, Margot Kidder, is asleep, because she's pretty much drunk most of the movie. And she's blacked out drunk. So he uses a unicorn, little like glass figurine, and like stabs her to death. But her screams are muffled by the sounds of the carolers. And it's from here that Jess is now kind of on her own, because like Phyllis goes up to look for Barb and ends up having the door shut. So Phyllis is not going to have a good day. Then the call comes in, again from the moaner, and they keep him on long enough. Then they get the call back from the cops, and they say that the call is coming from inside the house. Well, you find out that Mrs. McHenry, she has her own phone line in her room. And so the person who's been calling and doing all of that has been doing it from her room, sneaking into the house and making those obscene phone calls. And so they try to call back and get Jess to get out of the house, right? Sergeant Nash is like trying to get her out of the house. Like that's his only job at this point, is to get her to leave the house. But she doesn't listen. She runs upstairs, opens the door to the bedroom, finds both Phyllis and Barb dead. And then this is where I will fully admit it's kind of cool. She looks through the crack of the door and she just sees like the one eyeball of Billy looking at her. And so she freaks out and she runs down into the basement. And she's like, locks the door and she's stuck in the basement. But then Peter, who is like wildly upset, completely distraught, like in just, almost like a violent emotional state over this whole situation about the abortion, because he asked her to marry him. She said no. He was going to quit working with the church. He destroys his piano. You know what I mean? Like, he's like in this very bad emotional headspace. So he breaks into the garage or into the basement where she's at and approaches her, and she doesn't know what we know as the audience, that there's a high likelihood that, he's just like, he's pissed. But she's like, stay away. And he just keeps going closer towards her. And she's got, I think, like a fire poker, and she beats him to death. And then, the cops get in there and they find his body and her. Now, they find her barely conscious. I thought in my brain when I was watching this, it looks almost like she died. Like she beat him to death. But maybe I just missaw that scene. And of course, like, thinking that Peter was the killer, that she killed the killer, they put her in bed to sleep alone. And then, of course, just like at the end of the movie, you hear the killer's voice from the attic. And then the attic hatch opens up again, where there's Claire's and Miss McHenry's bodies, because they weren't discovered by the authorities. And then the telephone begins to ring again. So it's a very ominous ending to the movie, and I kind of dig the ominous ending to the movie, even though it's largely bloodless. Not really, it relies more on the vibes, more on the feels, more on the characters. The incompetence of the police, the call coming from inside the house sort of thing. The girl's not really knowing, like, is it like just all these other elements of it, right? Like I said, like the whole thing with that little girl dying, is that connected to this? We don't know. And so probably, I would say, if you had to ask me, I'd probably say that in this particular place, yes, the death of that little girl was probably Billy doing that. Now, I enjoy the idea of not knowing much about the antagonist, but at the same time, the storyteller in me is like, I kind of want to know about the antagonist, right? Like, what's the motivation here? Now, the 2006 remake answers that question in one of the worst imaginable ways I've ever seen. And it is a movie that I'm going to talk about that. But this movie on its own is good. It's, it's definitely again, found its audience, had mixed reception when it came out. It does have something to say about abortion, about the Catholic Church, things like that. Albeit it is subtle, and it's not beating you on the head with it with the fire poker, but it's subtle. And I like that, because it gives you something to kind of ruminate on in the back of your brain while you're watching this movie take place. So on that front, I would say yes. As far as horror movies go, this is definitely a classic slasher. It is the birth of the slashers. What follows it, the two other films that follow it, your mileage will vary. My mileage ran out of gas. But that's just my thought. What are yours? Let me know. You guys can find me on youtube.com/Podio Commentary, or anywhere you get your podcasts. Please feel free to leave a review. If you can, give it a follow. And if you want to support the show and support me watching more movies, good, bad, or the other, head on over to patreon.com/Matt Jarbo, and you guys can sponsor an episode. Thank you all very much.